In a courtroom where justice is meant to be served, these children decided to take it into their own hands. In today's video, we explore the powerful and heartbreaking stories of how raw emotion can sometimes override the law. Starting with Dale Williams. 11th July 2019 was supposed to be a normal day in court. 62-year-old Dale Williams was all set to appear for his murder trial, and since he had already pleaded guilty, no one was really expecting any twists. But that's not what happened. Dale Williams had coldly carried out the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Elizabeth Pledger. He had confessed to the brutal act, running her car off the road in 2017 and then shooting the 46-year-old mother of two. He'd pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and weapons charges, a desperate attempt to soften the blow of the life sentence that loomed. But for the victim's sons, justice wasn't just about legal procedure, but untamed emotion and getting their revenge. As Elizabeth's sister prepared to deliver a victim impact statement, a wave of grief and fury washed over the room. Anthony Dees, Elizabeth's 30-year-old son, was walking with his aunt when he suddenly broke free. He darted toward Williams, jumped over a table, and tried attacking him. 3 deputies tried to stop him, but Dees, fueled by anger, wrestled free and dragged Williams to the ground. The chaos intensified as Jerome Stewart Dees, Anthony's 23-year-old brother, joined the fight. He could be seen in a video taken in the courtroom, trying to run around officers as well to come to his brother's aid. Video of the attack shows all 3 men on the ground. One of the brothers was seen kicking Williams, and the other was throwing punches as their aunt was banging her hand against a podium, screaming. Jerome was also heard screaming, "He killed my mother, man. That was my mama. She took care of me, bro." In the end, the officers had to use a stun gun on Jerome. After quite some time, both brothers were finally subdued and escorted from the courtroom. The brothers, overwhelmed by grief, were themselves taken into custody, facing charges of assault, contempt of court, and obstruction of official business. Williams ultimately received his sentence, 23 years to life. Moving on to Tristan Lamoureux. In 2009, Tristan Lamoureux was sentenced for the murder of his 19-year-old wife, Misty, in Cedar City, Utah. Lamoureux had shot Misty multiple times in the head before attempting to flee the scene. Police arrived to find Misty's lifeless body in the bathroom and Lamoureux running from the apartment. He was arrested and later pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, avoiding trial. At his sentencing, Misty's brother, Jason Wilson, was called to deliver a victim impact statement. As Wilson spoke about the devastating loss of his sister and the pain it brought to his family, emotions in the courtroom grew tense. His voice grew more intense as he turned his attention toward Lamoureux, glaring at him. The court bailiffs, sensing the shift in energy, cautiously moved closer. As Wilson continued, he suddenly ran behind the attorney's table, attempting to strike Lamoureux. Before he could land a punch, multiple bailiffs sprang into action, tackling both men to the ground. The courtroom erupted in chaos as officers restrained Wilson and quickly escorted him out. Despite the emotional nature of the attack, Wilson faced only a misdemeanor disorderly conduct citation and no further charges. Once the order was restored, the sentencing resumed, and the judge sentenced Lamoureux to 15 years to life in prison for Misty's murder. Iron County Attorney Scott Garrett later commented on the courtroom confrontation, stating that while high emotions are expected during sentencing hearings, maintaining order and security remains a priority. Anytime you have a sentencing like that, the emotions are high. The families are there, Garrett said, adding that bailiffs had sensed Wilson's escalating emotions before the outburst occurred. Wilson apologized for his actions before being led out of the courtroom, expressing regret for the disruption. Despite the brief chaos, the sentencing went forward, and Lamoureux was formally sent to prison. The dramatic incident, caught on video, highlighted the intense grief felt by Misty's family as they sought justice for her brutal murder. While Wilson's actions were driven by overwhelming emotion, the court emphasized the need to maintain order, even in the most heartbreaking cases. Next, Jason Howard. The Warren, Ohio courtroom was the scene of a violent outburst during a pre-trial hearing for Jason Howard, a 24-year-old man accused of a horrific crime, the murder of his ex-girlfriend, 27-year-old Jamila West, and her 3 young children in Columbus. The 2006 case had drawn considerable attention, and the courtroom was already very tense. Howard, shackled and facing multiple murder charges, sat before the judge. Suddenly, the carefully maintained order of the court dissolved. Louis West, Jamila's brother, a 30 40-year-old man driven by grief and rage, lunged at Howard. Sergeant Phil Eckenrode, the sole officer between the accused and the victim's family, found himself struggling to contain the enraged brother. As Eckenrode grappled with Louis West, another relative, 29-year-old Sultan Hanzu, Jamila's cousin, joined the attack, diving through the doorway and striking Howard repeatedly. The courtroom erupted, a chaotic scene captured on television cameras. Howard, seemingly stunned, could only try to deflect the blows. The video showed him sitting silently afterwards, unharmed but undoubtedly shaken. Eckenrode later recalled the incident, saying, "It was my job to try to protect my prisoner to the best of my ability." Victoria West, Jamila's mother, later explained that the fight began after she lightly touched Howard on the back of the head, an action that prompted a deputy to grab her and force her to the ground. This incident may have ignited the brothers' pent-up emotions. Despite the intensity of the attack, Howard sustained only minor scratches. He maintained his innocence, claiming he did not kill Jamila and her children. He was in court on separate charges related to a shooting in Warren days before the Columbus tragedy. Both Louis West and Sultan Hanzu were arrested and charged with assault. The murder charges against Howard were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, adding another layer of complexity to this tragic case. Moving on to Alfred Gaynor. The Greenfield District Court in Springfield, Massachusetts, became a battleground of grief and vengeance during a pre-trial hearing for accused serial killer Alfred Gaynor. Gaynor, accused of the brutal murders of 9 women between 1995 and 1998, terrorized Springfield, his reign of terror ending only after a DNA match linked him to the horrific crimes. Finally, he sat shackled in a courtroom, hands cuffed behind his back, as the legal proceedings began. Among the spectators was Eric Downs, son of one of Gaynor's victims. Downs, who was sitting in the front row, was visibly emotional throughout the proceedings. He suddenly surged forward and leapt over the barricade separating the gallery. He lunged at Gaynor, unleashing a flurry of punches. Gaynor's sister, Catherine Gaynor, attempted to intervene, while Downs' cousin, Robert Hill, joined the fray in support of Downs. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Downs managed to strike Gaynor, even smashing a chair on him before court officers could pull the accused killer away and out of the courtroom. Order was eventually restored, but the tension remained thick. When the hearings resumed, 8 uniformed court officers stood guard, and the 2 rows closest to the defendants remained empty. Judge Robert F. Cumore Jr. released Downs and Hill on a $1,000 bond each and Catherine Gaynor on her own recognizance, ordering them to stay away from each other. He acknowledged the raw emotions at play, stating, "This is for your safety as well as that of others." Despite the outburst, they would be allowed to attend future hearings only after identifying themselves to court officers beforehand. Ultimately, Alfred Gaynor pleaded guilty to all 9 murders and received 8 consecutive life terms. Next up, Francisco Cladivaldo Mariano de Moura. In São José de Belmonte, Brazil, the murder trial of 38-year-old Francisco Cladivaldo Mariano de Moura took a shocking turn. De Moura was on trial for the 2012 killing of Francisco Alves, an incident that began with an argument over a missing donkey. On November 29th, during the jury session, Alves's 27-year-old son, Cristiano Alves Terto, sat quietly at the back of the courtroom, harboring a deadly plan. As the trial progressed, Terto suddenly stood up, pulled out a .38 caliber revolver, and fired 2 shots directly at De Moura, just feet away from a juror and an attorney. The courtroom erupted into chaos as people scrambled for safety. De Moura, desperate to escape, stumbled backwards while Terto continued to fire at him. A barrage of bullets rained down as De Moura tried to shield himself, ducking behind furniture for cover. Once his gun was empty, Terto charged forward and brutally struck De Moura twice in the head with the weapon. 2 women attempted to stop Terto, pulling at him in desperation, but the enraged son broke free and fled the scene. The gunman was chased down by police and arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, according to the Pernambuco military police. De Moura, miraculously surviving the attack, was rushed to a local hospital and later transferred to a facility 250 miles away. He had previously confessed to shooting Alves back in 2012 after an altercation on Alves Farm in Lagoa Alexandre. Alves had reportedly accused De Moura of theft and approached him with a wooden stick, prompting causing Demura to fire warning shots before ultimately shooting Alves in the abdomen. Alves died 18 days later. Following the shooting, Demura fled to Salgueiro, a city 200 miles away, where he was eventually captured. The circumstances that led to the prolonged delay of his trial remain unclear. Terto was taken into custody the day after the attack and has remained behind bars since. The courtroom shooting, captured on video, was released to the public days later, shocking viewers worldwide. Moving on to Paul Wade. At the Jefferson County Justice Center in Louisville, Kentucky, a routine arraignment for 31-year-old Paul Wade erupted into chaos. Wade stood accused of the brutal murders of 26-year-old Edward Smith and 25-year-old Alexis McCrary, shot dead in the Russell neighborhood 3 weeks earlier. Surveillance footage linked Wade to the crime, leading to his October 13th arrest on 2 counts of murder and illegal possession of a handgun. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Ann Haney, who had an 8th-grade student shadowing her, eager to learn about the judicial process. But what was supposed to be a straightforward proceeding turned into a shocking display of courtroom violence. Seated in the gallery were grieving family members of the victims, tensions simmering just beneath the surface. When the hearing began, a minor disturbance arose between them and court deputies, but proceedings resumed. However, since Wade's attorney was absent, Judge Haney rescheduled the hearing for a later date. As deputies escorted Wade from the courtroom, he muttered an expletive toward the victims' families. That was the breaking point. In an instant, multiple family members sprang from their seats, scaling public benches in a frenzied attempt to reach Wade. The room exploded into chaos as screaming filled the air. Court deputies rushed in, trying to contain the melee. Wade, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffed, backed against a wall before darting through an open door behind the judge's bench. But he wasn't alone. At least 4 enraged individuals pursued him, vaulting over barriers and even scrambling over the judge's desk in a desperate attempt to get to him. Judge Haney, stunned by the unfolding violence, slammed the panic button and screamed for help. The 8th-grade student, caught in the turmoil, sat frozen in terror. Reinforcements arrived, deploying pepper spray to subdue the attackers. The pandemonium finally settled, but not before 4 people were arrested. Joshua Whetstone, Monica Kane, Isaiah Smith, and Joshua Smith were charged with disorderly conduct and obstructing governmental operations. Isaiah and Joshua Smith faced additional charges of assault and resisting arrest. In the aftermath, Judge Haney reflected on what went wrong. She noted that the missing door allowing Wade to escape behind her bench should have been replaced. More deputies should have been present, and perhaps emotions could have been diffused beforehand. She also said, "The court system is a long process, and they are going to have to get their emotions in check, understand what the system is about, but not ever act that way in a courtroom again." James Douglas Gonzalez. 15-year-old James Douglas Gonzalez stood trial for murder in Mobile, Alabama. The year was 1992, and Gonzalez had been accused of shooting and killing 18-year-old Matthew Hall during a confrontation at a party. Hall and his friends had been celebrating at a local motel when he stepped outside into the parking lot. Sitting in a nearby car was Gonzalez. Accounts of what happened next varied. Gonzalez claimed Hall slapped and attacked him, forcing him to act in self-defense, but others saw it differently. What was clear was that one gunshot ended Hall's life that night. As the courtroom filled on the day of the verdict, tension hung thick in the air. A dozen deputies were stationed around the room, bracing for any outbursts. Among the anxious crowd sat Matthew Hall's father and his younger brother, Kevin, waiting for justice. But justice, in their eyes, never came. Instead of a murder conviction, the jury found Gonzalez guilty of lesser misdemeanor charges and criminally negligent homicide. It was a crushing blow to the Hall family. The decision hit Kevin the hardest. Before anyone could react, he leapt from his seat, cleared a partition, and lunged at Gonzalez. His fists landed hard on the defendant's face, sending the courtroom into chaos. Screams erupted as Matthew Hall Sr. joined the fray, swinging at the teenager who had taken his son's life. Deputies swarmed, struggling to contain the brawl as the Hall men fought with everything they had. It took 8 people to pull them off Gonzalez and pin them to the ground. Courtroom spectators stood frozen, some screaming, others watching in stunned silence. In the chaos, Gonzalez's mother and grandmother sobbed as they watched their son be attacked. Several people were trampled in the scuffle, forcing paramedics to intervene. Order was eventually restored, and Gonzalez, rattled but unharmed, was escorted out of the courtroom. Judge Braxton Cottrell wasted no time in punishing the Hall men, sentencing both father and son to 5 days in jail for contempt of court. They were released after just 1 night. A month later, Gonzalez returned to receive his sentence, 1 year in prison, the maximum penalty for his conviction. Next up, Jeffrey Clark. Now, we head to Fraser, Michigan, where 33-year-old Jeffrey Clark is in court, facing first-degree premeditated murder charges for the brutal execution of 28-year-old Jare Robertson. It was the 4th of July when Clark, after an argument with Robertson, hunted him down across town, chasing him into an apartment complex parking lot. Surveillance footage captured every chilling second of what prosecutors later called an execution. The courtroom sat in tense silence as the prosecution presented the damning evidence. The video showed Robertson collapsing to the ground, wounded and helpless, as Clark stood over him, gun in hand. With his last bit of strength, Robertson raised a hand as if begging for mercy, but there was none. Clark fired again and again, leaving the victim for dead before walking away. As the prosecution prepared to introduce further footage, the tension inside the courtroom reached a breaking point. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Sitting in the gallery was Jare Robertson's twin brother, Jerry, watching as the final moments of his sibling's life played out on the screen. Overcome with fury, he exploded from his seat and charged at Clark, unleashing a flurry of blows to the back of his head. The defendant, shackled at the waist, struggled to fight back, but was helpless against the onslaught. Deputies and attorneys rushed in, trying to separate the two men as the courtroom descended into pandemonium. Clark's father, enraged, leaped up from his seat, engaging in a shouting match with another man. Meanwhile, Jare Robertson continued yelling, his voice filled with grief and rage. "He's still shooting him. He's on the ground already, and he's still shooting. He's begging you not to kill him." The courtroom had turned into a battleground. It took multiple deputies to pull Jerry off Clark, finally restraining and cuffing him as the judge attempted to restore order. Clark, visibly shaken, was ushered out of the courtroom, shouting, "They gonna see you!" at his attacker. His father, still fuming, was heard apologizing, claiming, "He assaulted my son." After several minutes, the chaos settled and court proceedings resumed. Despite the shocking outburst, the hearing continued, and Clark was ultimately bound over for trial. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. An ankle monitor placed him at the scene. His own girlfriend testified that he had threatened her after the killing, and the video told a story that no defense could refute. The jury needed little time to decide. Clark was convicted of first-degree murder, felony firearm, and felon in possession of a firearm. His sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had been served, but the pain in that courtroom was undeniable. Moving on to Vashon Flowers. In May 2019, a Michigan man fatally shot his wife in the chest after coming home at 6:30 a.m. The victim's son, feeling justice was not being served, took matters into his own hands, creating a courtroom spectacle by attacking the accused. A dispute over cigarettes reportedly led Vashon Flowers to fatally shoot his wife, Jamie, at their Muskegon Heights residence. The couple's argument escalated over more than a day, prompting police intervention to separate them. Despite leaving the scene, Flowers returned later, forced his way into the home, and shot Jamie 4 times. The 46-year-old then surrendered to authorities and was charged with open murder. Jamie's daughter, Paris, recounted the horrific scene in court, something which she had to witness, unfortunately. She described Vashon forcing her mother to the ground and choking her as Jamie begged, "You don't have to do this, Vashon. Please don't do this." After this, Paris heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire. During the hearing, the son was seated in the gallery with the rest of his siblings when suddenly he jumped and headed straight towards his mother's killer. A surveillance clip of the trial shows London Thomas, son of victim Jamie Thomas Flowers, bolting from his seat and hopping the barrier in an attempt to attack Vashon Flowers during his preliminary examination at Muskegon County District Court. Thomas got within inches of Flowers, but was unable to lay a hand on him before law enforcement officers promptly took him down. He was arrested and later appeared in court, where he was held in civil contempt of court and barred from any future proceedings in Judge Raymond Kostrio's courtroom, including future hearings in Flowers' case. Lastly, Tevin Merriweather. In June 2019, Tevin Merriweather, 25, was charged with the murder of 34-year-old Myron Pierce in DeKalb County, Georgia. The two men got into an argument at a gas station off Glenwood Avenue, allegedly over money. The dispute escalated into a physical fight, during which Merriweather pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots, killing Pierce instantly. At a bond hearing, Pierce's 15-year-old daughter, Tashia Campbell, sat in the gallery as the defense attorney argued for Merriweather's release. Overwhelmed with with grief, Campbell suddenly stood up and shouted, "Why did you kill my daddy?" before lunging toward Merriweather. Court deputies reacted quickly, grabbing the distraught teen before she could reach him. They restrained and escorted her out of the courtroom as she continued to cry out. The emotional outburst momentarily disrupted the proceedings, but after order was restored, the judge ultimately denied Merriweather's bond, sending him back to jail. According to police reports, the deadly encounter began when Pierce, a father and beloved member of his community, accused Merriweather of scamming him out of money. Witnesses said Pierce began punching Merriweather outside the gas station. In response, Merriweather pulled a gun and fired more than 20 rounds, hitting Pierce multiple times. A witness recalled hearing at least 17 gunshots, and investigators later recovered 22 shell casings from the scene. Pierce suffered at least 3 gunshot wounds to his upper chest and 2 more to his lower right side. Medics rushed him to the hospital, but he did not survive. Merriweather was arrested and charged with murder. He remains in custody at the DeKalb County Jail without bond. These courtroom outbursts, driven by raw grief and a desperate need for justice, reveal the devastating suffering of the victims' families. That being said, it's a wrap on this video. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Criminal Corner so you don't miss the next ones.